There's a really popular library in the Ruby world called Sidekiq, and it's designed to be a background worker library. So if you have something like, oh shoot, I'm signing in, but a user just registered, but I have to go send them an email, or hey, I need to send out a push notification, those kinds of things. Obviously, you don't want to handle those in your web request because that would slow everything down. Plus, if email is unavailable, that might return an error. It's some of these things you want to, just do later, not right now. Do them somewhere, and also, it's totally fine if if it fails, because I want you to just retry it until it works. So Sidekiq on the Ruby world is a really popular implementation of this. It's backed by Redis. And what I wanted to do for fun was port this to Rust. There's actually a few other ports of this library, but one thing that I wanted to do was make it use Tokio by default. So everything is asynchronous. And then there are a few, last time on this lightning round, I shared the middleware stack, or how developers can add pieces of code into the request. So, hey, do this email later, right? I can validate that. I can write any custom code I want to modify that job or change that job as I'm going, or halt things if someone's not paying for a premium feature, right? You can do whatever you want by injecting code in the stack as it's being executed. Today, I just wanted to do a quick little update on that, which is a quick overview. This is what a worker implementation looks like. On the right-hand side, you can see I can define some worker struct. I can implement some custom functions like you would implement on any other struct. And then down here, this is an implementation of a worker. This is kind of what I wanted to hit one more really important thing. One really important thing I wanted to implement with Sidekiq Rust, this port I'm doing, is I wanted the arguments of the worker to be strongly typed. In the Ruby world, everything's like a hash, an array, or a string, right? And in Sidekiq within Ruby, it's no different. It's just everything's a hash. And here I wanted to make it a challenge for myself to use SERDI for serialization and deserialization. And that would allow me to create this really cool, strongly typed worker interface. So when you implement a worker, you choose your arguments, which are a strongly typed argument, and then you can implement this perform function. There's a bunch of stuff defined for you, but you can also override options to put them in different queues. You could do whatever you want. But this is an implementation. And on the left-hand side here, I have just another example that's kind of more fully baked, start to finish. The one on the left-hand side compiles. One thing that also I got requests for, and I'm going to run this demo here. This demo is just going to enqueue a job every second, and then the worker is going to process it. One thing Sidekiq ships with by default is this admin UI. And so one thing I wanted to implement for this implementation was integration with the Sidekiq web. So you can see there are different queues. You can see what's busy. You can see the memory utilization and how long these have been running. So with this in place, these jobs complete so quickly. I'll do like one quick example, and then I'll end this demo. But if we take these jobs, for example, and say, hey, let's pretend that each of these takes like 10 seconds to complete. We will see the worker start up in the Sidekiq web on the right, and then we should start to see work on this jobs table. It polls every 5 seconds or so. And I'm on the wrong branch, so this is not going to work. Sorry, but that's what live demos are all about. You can see here, though, that it is keeping track of busy threads, and you could see, different retry queues and other things that are going on. So it's just an update. it's still like fully featured, supports all the Sidekiq features. It also now supports the Sidekiq web. So if you have a Ruby app, you can have your Rust app just start working, and you'll be able to see it with everything else. Lastly, we support cron jobs. So if you have some kind of work you want to do periodically, like, hey, every day I want to go find the users that haven't signed in 30 days and send them an email because, whatever, and you want to go remind them to sign in, or any accounts that are over 90 days old that haven't paid, that are free, I want to deactivate them, right? Anything like that, put it on as a periodic job, and it'll work just fine. So that's kind of an overview of Sidekiq Rust. If you have feature requests, go ahead and make an issue, and I'll implement it. That's it. Are there any questions? Yes, I should have switched the branch, but I'm not going to, because that branch is like really, really, well, I don't know. It works, but there's a open pull request. You can go read it if you want to see what I've done, but there's a lot of hackiness in there.
Oh, don't worry. It is definitely your prerogative to decide how much you want to take on in live coding.
I just realized, like, I have this like finish thing that's basically like, check out the main branch and pull all the latest commits into it. And it's kind of like my dopamine hit, like everything's merged. I hit finish, enter, and it's like, so good. And I totally sometimes eagerly hit finish, and I did. So I don't even remember which branch. I've got 3 named like process stats, real-time job stats, and I can't remember which one is the open merge request or the open pull request.
Well, nice. Thank you very much for presenting, Garrett. We appreciate you and your lightning talk here. Does anybody have any questions for Garrett? Maybe not even necessarily pertinent to the talk. Do you have any questions about the work Garrett's doing? Or maybe how he discovered Rust? I think that's always an interesting question.
So I was curious in seeing what the boundary looks like where you're actually passing the arguments into the worker. So you mentioned like making those arguments strongly typed. Using sturdy. I'm interested in seeing that piece in particular. If we could dive into some source.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I could just share my screen again, and we can look at some code.
Yeah, you bet.
I was waiting for someone to be like, "You haven't stopped sharing yet." close the messaging app or something. No. So
for those, is this going to be source code of the project that's in GitHub?
Yes. Do you want me to pull it up on GitHub instead?
So there are people in chat asking if we could get the repo link. I'm sure part of that is so that they can follow along too.
Let me pull that in here. I'm pretty sure it's technically the crate is called rusty-sidekiq because, again, there's like 4 other implementations, but I named it Sidekiq RS, and so that's kind of what I'm using. Okay, so I think Andrew was asking that question. This is what like the kind of more feature with a demo with a bunch of stuff in here looks like.
Yeah, gotcha.
I have this. If we zoom in on this section here, I have this a bunch of things that are implemented for you on the trait. And one of those things is like this options, right? And so the options allows you to specify a queue that you want to drop this into. Sidekiq does have the concept of queues. They're just different like named lists inside of Redis. So nothing super fancy there, but it is a way of like segregating your work for an application. And then there's in Sidekiq, the convention is to call perform async on some worker, like as a class method. So here, it is expecting you to put in this payment reports argument as you enqueue some work into Sidekiq. So I call this out to say, if you're calling on the worker directly, then by default, you're going to, it will fail to compile if you're not using the strongly typed argument. That said, you can kind of work around it because I create this convenience function on the crate itself, which is just this perform async, where I let you provide some kind of class or worker name and some queue and some arguments. And these arguments can be anything you want. You can actually call serde JSON. It has this like JSON macro where you can say user GUID 1, 2, 3 or something.
So with that version of the API, like when you pass in payment report args, like is that actually using the derive serialize and derive deserialize?
Exactly.
So by the time it hits the worker, it's just JSON.
By the time it hits Redis, it's just JSON. And to point that out here, you can actually enqueue the JSON directly. You can enqueue by bypassing the strongly typed args. And that's actually necessary because suppose you're in Rust and you want to call some worker that's defined in Ruby land, you sometimes just have to break that around. That said, you can still pass in the strongly typed arguments through this like sidekiq perform async function. So you can still make it really strongly typed and then kick it off into some worker in the Ruby world. But yeah, that's how that works. And then in the middleware down here, there's like I think it's like called a handler middleware. Middleware stack is kind of what's like a build into, so you can extend it yourself if you'd like to. This is what it looks like. There's this worker.call function, which may not look. Yeah, this is kind of like where we're going to get into the weeds, and it gets like pretty crazy with Rust because like there's some things you have to do in the type system, or you can't necessarily. It's like you can't have like a generic type parameter where the type parameter can change inside of a data structure, right? So if you do something that's like, oh, I want some vec of t, once t is pegged to a type, you can't have it be like t is a string and it's an integer, right? So in order to make it a data structure work with like a t or some like integer or some string or some whatever, you kind of have to get creative. And the way I did this was like I created a new type that wrapped the whole concept of like this different type. And it's actually just a Lambda function that gets called. So this will dispatch it with the proper type. But what that looks like under the hood is, let's see where it actually calls perform. I can't remember where it is in the code now. But essentially it just uses serde to say, like, take the type that we are supposed to cast it into and then put that into the argument so that it does compile as a strongly typed thing.
Gotcha.
So I'm not really, the last time I touched this code was like 3 months ago. The last time all I've been working on recently, I should say, is like the sidekiq web stuff. But I'm going to look for it really quick. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll just hand it back over. I don't want to hog the podium.
Well, thanks for walking through that. That's awesome.
Sure. Oh, here it is. Found it. So when we invoke the worker, this is where we have some particular worker type, and then we can get the args, which is this type that we pass in, that's the serde one, whichever we use, as part of this invoke step. So here's like this worker ref, like I said, where we create this like function lambda, and that's where we start passing types in. So it's a way of like rolling up types inside of a type, which is, again, not where we need to be going in this particular talk, but eventually it does get unrolled and deserialized and then passed into the worker with its strongly typed parameter. But you can see it's just parses the JSON and then pushes it in. That's it.